Energy Media readers, the Business Council of Alberta has released a very, very important strategy that I want to talk about today with their president, Adam Legge. And it's calling for a number of things, including basically it's a three-pronged strategy that includes the reopening of the economy after COVID-19, rethinking of the Alberta government's fiscal model, which I think everybody agrees has to be changed. And on top of that, a different industrial and economic strategy over the next 20 years. This is big stuff. We'll only skim the surface with Adam today. But Adam, I'd like to welcome you to the interview.
Thank you, Markham, for having me.
And look, kudos to you guys for leading the charge on this. And regular readers will know that I've been arguing for some of this stuff for a long time, and it's nice to see an organization. I mean, your organization's got some heavy hitters in it. Suncor comes to mind. So when I talk to you, I think that I'm talking to some of the bigger, more progressive companies in Alberta, and to see you take the leadership role, full marks for you guys.
Well, thank you. And, it's all credit to our members who are really trying to push the envelope in terms of Alberta's prosperity and where we can go, and how do we make sure that despite COVID-19 and the oil price wars, we don't suffer any worse than we need to. And to begin to look to the future in terms of what does that reimagined Alberta economy look like, which is bigger and bolder than I think where we thought we could go in the past.
Yeah, it's funny how big shocks like this change people's thinking. So excellent work. So let's talk about the first thing in the phased-in reopening of the economy. I have done a couple of interviews with analysts and economists about this, and everybody agrees, and you apparently, your organization agrees, a phased-in approach that we don't want to do too fast, because then you can run into another wave of infections, and shutting it down again and trying to reopen is worse than doing it in a phased-in manner and taking it slow and cautious. And I assume you'd agree with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What we did is as you mentioned earlier, we sent a letter to the Premier with basically a 3-point plan for a stronger Alberta. The first one is a very thoughtful, safe, and ethical phased reopening of the economy. We want to make sure that we know that there's probably anywhere between 12 and 24 months between vaccine. So we need to figure out what do we do between now and a vaccine, which we're sort of calling phase 2, that enables the economy to be and I want to be very clear, in a very safe and healthy way, that enables the economy to come back to the greatest extent possible. We just see the impairment to many, many businesses, to many jobs. And so what can we do is we actually have an economy to come back to with a vaccine. So it is about thoughtful. It's about working with government to bring the best expertise of public health and safety with some of the practices that are being used by Alberta employers who are operating essential services. So bring that best operational expertise with public health and safety to have a winning strategy here in Alberta for a phased reopening.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what's really important about this is that if we start talking about it now, you'll convince a lot of Albertans who maybe were, a little on the fence about social distancing and masks and all of that and self-isolation. But we need to convince those people that they're part of this as well, so that we have the highest percentage possible of people who are supporting this strategy. Because, if you have 20% who don't, they can infect the rest of the folks. So it's, again, kudos to you folks. So let's talk also about the Alberta government's short and long-term fiscal model. Any chance that it includes a PST from your point of view?
Well, I think, the ultimate punchline, Markham, is that while many of us have been saying Alberta has a spending problem, I think many of us would also agree Alberta has a revenue problem. We've just had so much volatility with the revenues in the province as a result of reliance on royalties. Now with COVID, we're going to see that is down because the prices are so low. Corporate income taxes are going to be down because so many companies are struggling right now. And finally, personal incomes will be down because of the job losses. So we have a short-term need, and we also, quite frankly, have a long-term need. And so it is looking at a new model. So it's not just sort of layering a new, for example, sales tax on top of what exists now. It's about taking what we have, frankly, blowing it up and really starting from scratch and saying, how do we create a modern dynamic revenue model that's right for Alberta? Frankly, a sales tax should be in the mix, but there have been thoughtful analyses by people like Jack Mintz who said we can have a sales tax, but we may have higher personal exemptions or lower personal income tax rates so that Albertans are, frankly, not paying a heck of a lot more, but we're able to create certainty and stability of that revenue coming into the province. So absolutely a sales tax should be considered in the mix.
Yeah, again, and I think it's a very positive contribution to, advancing the narrative on this thing, is because there's such a stubborn resistance in Alberta to move away from this reliance on natural resources revenue, that to have your organization with all the, significant economic players in it that you do, I think really is exactly what's needed. Well, let's talk about the bold and inspiring economic and industrial strategy, because diversification has been talked about in Alberta for decades, and I think the momentum is building to really do something significant. So let's share your thoughts on what you have in mind here.
Well, I think the big overarching piece, Markham, is that we have to, in Alberta, be very comfortable with getting to a place of feeling that our economic development doesn't always have to be about forced choices. That if we are talking about agriculture, if we're talking about technology innovation, if we're talking about manufacturing, it's not at the expense or loss of the oil and gas industry. We have plenty of assets and resources in this province that we can build upon. Oil and gas has been so much of our economic engine for decades, and it still will be. But it doesn't mean we have to ignore other opportunities as they are there for us. So agriculture is a huge piece of that. Transportation and logistics is a huge piece of that. Technology and innovation in its own right, but also as an enabler of innovation in energy, innovation in agriculture. I think we're going to see a huge resurgence of this notion of how do we domesticate our supply chain and our manufacturing based on what we've realized in the COVID scenario. So how do we do that? How do we become one of those more competitive places in the world, knowing that we can build and manufacture and innovate in the food that people need, the energy that people need, the products that people need. We have an amazing quality of life here in this province. Now people may be saying, I can work anywhere now. I've lived it for 6 or 8 weeks. I don't need to live in a busy, dense urban center that isn't as healthy and enjoyable. I can be here, I can be close to the mountains, or I can be close to nature. So these are the kinds of things that we can be advocating for, but in a way that makes us think about leapfrogging ahead of where we might have thought before. What are the incredible innovations and post-secondary research we need to be putting in place? What are the cities of the future in terms of transportation and hyperloops and high-speed rails? And so all of these things that we've talked about and dreamt about really should be on the table now as we begin to think about resilience and rebuilding Alberta from a stronger position.
Well, I'll tell you a little story from my own personal experience. Back in late 2017, I was hired on a freelance basis to do, so, full disclosure, I did the last copy edit on the Economic Diversification Advisory Committee's report to the Notley government. And one of the things that struck me about that, and I remember asking the committee co-chairs, was why isn't technology in here, like, especially energy technology? And there is so much innovation in, like, if you go to Calgary's Foothill Industrial Park and industrial parks in Edmonton and Lloydminster and Red Deer, you find little companies making amazing stuff that gets sold, all over the Canadian oil patch and down into the U.S. And these are companies that are ripe for either expanding into international markets, existing oil and gas markets, or making a pivot into other industrial markets that aren't oil and gas. And that it always gets ignored, and yet technology is so much about what Alberta is about, and I think should be really on the table. So again, I think that's a very good idea. And where so we've got the three parts of it. What comes next? You've sent a letter to the Premier. Has he responded?
So we've sent the letter to the Premier. We're working with his office on next steps. Really, the first part, that phase reopening, is something he's going to be announcing later today, April 30th. And so our ask is, as you roll that out, think of business as a strong ally and collaborator on that. On the revenue model and the economic development strategy, that's something that we're building over time. We know that there's lots still to be figured out in a post-COVID world, but wanting to work very closely with the provincial government on what that could look like, bringing some of the strengths, expertise, and innovators around our council table and many others in this province. So those second two, probably a little bit more in the future, but on the first one, I think the Premier and many Albertans and many Alberta businesses are ready to begin to look to phase two.
Yeah, I can see we've got some short-term issues that need to be addressed right away, and the reopening of the economy being the obvious one, and that gives us a little breather to discuss some of the other two issues that are a bit more medium-term to long-term. So,
Yeah.
good luck to you, and I have
Thank you.
absolutely no doubt that we will be discussing this issue again in the very near future. So, thanks for this, Adam.
Thanks, Markham.